So free agency has now been open for over 24 hours, and there's still some big name players available. Nazem Kadri, John Klingberg, I think Dylan Strome's a really intriguing name, but the signings now are definitely few and far between, so I wanted to kind of talk about some of my favorite signings and some of my least favorite signings from free agency so far. I've got 4 that I liked, 3 that I didn't like, but of course, if there's any that I don't talk about in this video that you think is good or bad, be sure to let me know down below in the comment section. I'm going to start off with one that I liked, and it's a bit of a cop-out answer because it's literally the biggest signing that took place. Johnny Gaudreau signing a 7-year, $68.25 million deal with the Blue Jackets, an AAV of $9.75 million. Now, in a lot of cases, I think just because a team signs a big name player for a lot of money or a really good player for a lot of money in free agency, that doesn't always necessarily mean it's a good signing and that it's a good contract. But I definitely feel like in this case, it's different, especially when you just look at the history, even just the recent history of the Columbus Blue Jackets. You know, back when Perron left and Duchesne left and Bobrovsky left in that offseason a couple years ago, everyone was saying how Columbus just couldn't keep star players in their organization, and then after all those guys left in free agency, Seth Jones wanted out and requested a trade, and then Pierre-Luc Dubois requested a trade as well. So I feel like Columbus just being able to finally land a superstar player, not even via trade or draft. This is a guy that chose to come to Columbus. He had other options. Obviously New Jersey offered him big money, the Islanders did as well, but he chose to go to the Blue Jackets, and the contract itself for the season that Johnny Gaudreau just had, I feel like is actually really good value. Like, they didn't even have to pay him north of $10 million per season. It's actually under. This is a guy that just had 115 points. He was legitimately one of the best players in the entire league this past season. I believe he finished 4th in Hart Trophy voting. The Blue Jackets finally have their superstar player who's going to be there for the long haul, and the contract isn't completely absurd. They didn't have to give him Panarin money, and I think that in and of itself is a huge win for the organization. Moving on now to a signing that I wasn't a huge fan of, the Detroit Red Wings signing defenseman Ben Chiarot to a 4-year, $19 million deal, so an AAV of $4.75 million. Now listen, I will say, I don't think Chiarot is as bad as the analytics say, and I'm not just saying that now because he's a part of the Red Wings. I said that when Florida gave up that huge package to acquire him at the trade deadline. There are things that I think he can bring to the Red Wings that is going to help. He's very physical and tough to play against out front of the net and battle with out front, and that's an area Detroit needed to greatly improve upon. So he should definitely make life for Nedeljkovic and Husso a little bit easier out front, but I just think Ben Chiarot is like average at best, honestly. Again, like I said, there are things he does well, but there's a lot of things he does poorly as well. Like, he takes a ton of penalties. His physicality sometimes hurts him because he'll jump up and try to, you know, stop a zone entry and completely miss a check or something like that and just be completely out of place. I really just feel like Ben Chiarot is an average NHL defenseman who does some things well, and Steve Yzerman is not paying him like that. He's paying him like he's an above average top 4 defenseman, and I just don't think Chiarot is that. Maybe we see Chiarot come to Detroit, get the opportunity to play with somebody like Moritz Seider, and he revives his career and plays some of the best hockey we've seen, but I just don't really think it's a great idea to give out 4-year, $19 million contracts to 31-year-old defensemen and hope for them to be something that we really haven't seen them be in at least a very long time. Getting back to another signing that I was a pretty big fan of, Ilya Samsonov signing a 1-year, $1.8 million deal with the Toronto Maple Leafs. Now, some people may not agree with me on this one because why would it be a good signing when Samsonov just had a season in which he had a sub 900 save percentage in 44 games? I'm just a really big fan of low risk, high reward moves, and I think this is literally the definition of that. I remember a time, you know, before Samsonov, Shesterkin, and Sorokin came over to the NHL, those 3 were regarded as like the best goaltending prospects in the world, and Samsonov's NHL career started off really well, and if you look at his numbers as a whole, like, he's 53, 23, and 10. He's won a lot more games than he's lost, and obviously a lot of that has to do with Washington being a really good regular season team over that span, but his NHL totals as a whole are very respectable, and he's 25 years old, which may not be that young for like a forward or something like that, but for goaltenders, that's still pretty young. I definitely still think Samsonov has the potential to be an above average starter in this league. He has all the tools. He's got the big frame. He's very athletic. I think under a good goaltending coach, which Toronto has, he should be able to thrive. I would definitely not be surprised if after the first couple of months of the season, Samsonov ends up being the Maple Leafs starter on most nights as opposed to Matt Murray. Moving back over now to one of the signings that I didn't like, and for me this takes the cake as maybe not the worst, because we can't really say that yet because he hasn't played a game with his new team just yet, but it's the most head scratching for sure. Defenseman Erik Gudbranson signing a 4-year, $16 million deal with the Columbus Blue Jackets. Now, I said this in my free agency review last night. I know that the market for defensemen was thin, and that probably led to a lot of defensemen getting overpaid, like Gudbranson, like Ben Chiarot, and Erik Gudbranson definitely did okay in Calgary this past season, but it was in a a depth role. He only played a little bit over 18 minutes a night, and I think a big reason he thrived is because of how good Daryl Suter's defensive system was. Now, based off the fact that Columbus committed $16 million to Gudbranson over the next 4 seasons, I think it's safe to say he's going to have a much bigger role with the Blue Jackets, probably play north of 20 minutes a night, but that just isn't Gudbranson's game. That's not where he thrives. He should be nothing more than a bottom-pairing physical defenseman that plays, 17 to 18 minutes a night. We've literally seen Gudbranson sign a contract before that had an AAV of $4 million, and it was with the Canucks, and it just didn't work. So again, for me, this was definitely one of the more confusing signings of free agency so far, and I just don't really see how this turns out being a good contract, but hey, Columbus also got Johnny Gaudreau, so this one's gonna kind of be swept under the rug by a lot of people, I feel like. Now for another signing that I really liked, Claude Giroux signing a 3-year, $19.5 million deal with the Ottawa Senators, so a $6.5 million annual average. I've said this multiple times throughout the offseason so far. I think Pierre Dorian has done an amazing job with pretty much all of the moves he's made so far this summer, this one being no exception. I honestly think the contract that they signed Giroux to was the perfect contract for where Claude Giroux is at in his career right now, 34 years old. It's not like they signed him to a 6 or 7 year deal. I think 3 years for the term is perfect, and $6.5 million for what Giroux can still bring to the table. Obviously, we could see, a decline in his game over the next 3 seasons, but right now, $6.5 million for Giroux, I think is honestly a little bit of a bargain. This is a guy who still can play on a top line, have amazing two-way impacts, is capable of driving a play, he's capable of running a power play as well. And for a team like the Ottawa Senators that are so young, like you look at that entire forward crop, especially the top 6, like DeBrincat, obviously still a young player, Brady Tkachuk, Josh Norris, Drake Batherson, Tim Stützle, they needed a veteran like Claude Giroux to come in there and tie that all together. I think this is a perfect fit. I think the Senators are a lot closer to playoff contention now than they were 2 months ago, and that's because of moves like the DeBrincat trade and like this free agent signing bringing in Giroux. Next up, we have the final signing we'll talk about in this video that I didn't like, Nicolas Delorey signing a 4-year, $7 million deal with the Philadelphia Flyers, an AAV of $1.75 million. I know that cap hit isn't incredibly high, but I just don't understand what Chuck Fletcher and the Philadelphia Flyers are doing. They bought out Oscar Lindblom to free up some cap space just so they can go out and commit $7 million to an enforcer over the next 4 seasons. And Chuck Fletcher actually defended this move by saying players like Nicolas Delorey are hard to come by. Well, the reason that they're hard to come by is because there isn't many enforcers left in the NHL anymore, because it's a quicker, faster, more skilled game than it was a long time ago. The Philadelphia Flyers would have been, I think, a prime candidate to land Johnny Gaudreau, but they just didn't have the cap space because Chuck Fletcher makes some wild decisions, trading for and signing Rasmus Ristolainen, trading for and signing Tony DeAngelo. It's obviously very clear that they're not trying to rebuild, but that team on paper right now, there's no way they make the playoffs in that stacked Metro division. I would bet a lot of money on it. Moving on now to the final signing we'll talk about in today's video, one that I was a big fan of, David Perron signing a 2-year, $9.5 million deal with the Red Wings, so an AAV of just $4.75 million. I feel the same way about this deal that I do about the Claude Giroux one. I think it's perfectly structured when you consider the age of David Perron, 34 years old, so with it just being a 2-year deal, there's minimal risk involved, and I think a cap hit of just $4.75 million a season for a guy who scored at a 25-plus goal pace over the past 4 seasons, well over a half point per game in those seasons as well. I think that's fantastic value. This is a guy who will be a legit needle mover for the Red Wings. He is a lethal finisher, which is something that the Red Wings have needed. They now have multiple weapons up front in terms of finishers with Kubalik, David Perron, Jacob Vrana, Lucas Raymond, as well as he develops. And let's say the Red Wings aren't competing for a playoff spot this upcoming season, or even the season after that, David Perron and the contract that he's currently on should easily be movable at a trade deadline and should fetch the Red Wings some really valuable assets. So that is going to wrap up today's video. Those were 4 signings that I really liked so far through free agency and 3 that I'm not so big of a fan of. Again, like I said at the start of the video, if there's any signings that I didn't cover today that you either really liked or really disliked, let me know down below in the comment section. If you guys enjoyed this video, please be sure to leave it a like. That is the best way to show your support, and most importantly, if this was your first time checking out the channel and you want more NHL content just like this, be sure to hit that subscribe button, and I'll talk to you all soon.